thank you, both of you, for staying up late tonight, especially you in Moscow, Anya.
Rick, this is a really big honor and pleasure and fun, and we are very excited. I'm talking for both of us, me and Anna.
Thanks. Well, it's fun for me too, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot, and I'm happy to share with you what I can. And let me tell you one coincidence, kind of a synchronicity. I am today. I just late last night. I just sent the okay to. I have a student who just got her PhD, just had her defense, and she's a Russian woman. Last night, I gave the final approval to her dissertation, and then today I am sending. You remember that young man from Siberia? He's 19 years old who wrote to me out of the blue. So he couldn't get hold of my book, Passion of the Western Mind. So I'm going to go to the post office and mail him a copy today. So there's 3 Russian, kind of a synchronistic connection between Russia and America right now, including that President Biden and President Putin are going to be meeting as well.
Yes, they're going to be meeting. And also there's a synchronicity. Me and Anna, we're both Russian, but at the moment I'm in Geneva, and that's where actually the President Putin and Biden are going to meet soon.
No kidding.
And Anna, she is in Russia. So we have like Russia, America, and Switzerland here on board.
Yes, and plus I was born in Geneva.
Yes. Wow.
I was born right on the shore of Lake Geneva there in Switzerland. Is kind of a heart center of Europe, East and West, and so many things happen in Geneva that are international. So it's symbolic.
That's true. Well, can we just jump right in? What do you
We'll jump right in.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, great. Well, the topic of today's meeting is Russia, and from astrological point of view. So before maybe we speak about current situation, can we just speak in general about Russia and Russian soul?
I thought a lot about that because I think Russia has already played such a huge role in not just the political or geopolitical world, but also in the world of the spirit. I personally have been deeply shaped by Russian people of the arts of literature, of music. For example, probably the 2 writers that most influenced me from my teenage years on were Tolstoy and Dostoyevsky. I literally read everything that they ever wrote. I think certainly everybody, culturally educated people in the rest of Europe and in the United States, and I think world culture, have been deeply influenced by them and by Chekhov and by and the musicians, the composers. I mean, and then in 20th century letters like Pasternak and Anna Akhmatova, and Solzhenitsyn. I mean, they've really had. What I'm trying to convey is there's something deep in the Russian soul that has been able to express itself in works of art that have somehow entered into the world soul, the collective psyche, in such a way that it has transformed it's transformed the world soul. And it seems, there's a specifically Russian quality. Now, what is that quality? I think it has deep roots in the Russian land, in the soil, in the natural world, almost kind of a spiritual shamanic power that is in the land. Um, it's also the way in which the Russian spirit has carried not only that kind of primal religiosity or um, nature embedded, earth embedded spirituality, but it's also it has carried, for example, a form of Christianity that has deep mystical characteristics. Russian Orthodox Christianity has kind of kept contact with or access with a kind of mystical core of the Christian mystery, which I think is been a great gift. Of course, there's a shadow side to if a particular nation, whether it's Russia or the United States, thinks that it is kind of the savior of humanity, that can have a shadow side of a kind of messiah complex, you know, messianic inflation can happen. And the United States, for example, is very guilty of that. And I think in some ways, the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States can be seen, you know, partly just in terms of geopolitics after World War II and the power struggle there, but it's also got a spiritual background to it as well,
Really?
where there's a feeling that each one is carrying a kind of saving message, a way of life that is right for the entire world. And somehow both nations, I think, have that additional challenge of recognizing our own shadow and seeing how that can distort the real gift that we each have. And I think, so I started by talking about Tolstoy and Dostoyevsky and Pasternak, all the great kind of cultural, spiritual figures, and people like the poet Rilke, you know, or his partner for a while, Lou Salome, who was Russian, who lived in Switzerland for a while too. You know who I mean? Lou Andreas Salome. She was
She was
Rilke's.
also Nietzsche, right?
She was what?
She was a
That's
friend
right.
of
Yeah,
Nietzsche.
yeah. So Nietzsche fell in love with her when she was quite young, and you know they had a kind of relationship, but I think she felt more like she wanted to be more student teacher, and I think or at least admirer and friend, but I think he fell in love with her romantically, and that was really his one big love in life was Lou Salome, and then his great work unfolded out of the romantic disappointment of not being with her. But then she went on to be Rilke's muse and lover, the poet, and then Freud's close confidant. She was a major figure and had an influence on Freud too, in a good way. Anyway, these are all examples of, I think, the Russian depth of soul. I suppose one way of looking at this, and I'm not the world's expert on this, but sometimes when, you know, Russia did not go through the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation that much of Europe did, and the United States came out of that. And the Reformation made a decisive separation of religion and politics, or church and state. And to some extent, that didn't happen in Russia. The Tsar and the church stayed much more closely intertwined, and in a way, the strength of Russia, that kind of mystical connection with unity, can also mean a lack of differentiation of between uh, religious and political, also between the leader and the people, where there can be the potential for a more authoritarian control, because there's less sense of the individual being able to have their own agency, their own free autonomy. But of course, so many Russians do feel the autonomy, they feel the individual freedom, but it's constrained by a collective political situation that is enforced by, at times, ruthless power. What I'm trying to articulate is perhaps a way in which the political struggles within Russia have, to some extent, historical and cultural and psycho-spiritual roots that are deeper than can be fixed by just a political change of policy. What's being demanded is a deep change in the collective kind of archetypal psyche of the Russian people, just as, and I'm not saying Russia has something different than the United States. We have our own huge moral, spiritual, psychological transformation we are going through and are trying to go through. And as we've all seen, our country got pretty vulnerable to authoritarianism over the last 4 years.
Maybe it's not easy for you to speak about Russian challenges because you're being American, and now the situation between our countries is difficult. So,
Yes.
But I want to ask you as a maybe as a not American person, but as a psychologist. Yes.
Yes.
More like, how do we how do an astrologist? What, from astrological point of view, do you know what are the main archetypes that
Yes.
not rule Russia, but how to say the go along with Russian path?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do we work with our challenges internally as a human beings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe some of your our viewers, when they hear this conversation, they may have already seen the presentation that I did on the world transits
Yes.
of our current time. So of course, those are important archetypal factors that are influencing the whole world. Not in those earlier talks, I would particularly talking about the U.S., but obviously they're part of the whole world situation. So there's three big, the outer three planets of Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. Those three are really activated these last few years and still today. And boy, they have such a whenever those planets come into major alignment with respect to the Earth, we see quite significant impulses that come into play in Russian history and in world history. And I'll first just mention the fact that we've just come out of a roughly 15-year period that the Uranus square Pluto has been happening. That's a very, the Uranian energy is very Promethean. It's rebellious. It brings rapid change. an impulse for freedom, etc. But it also liberates whatever it touches. And when it's in major aspect to Pluto, as it has been here, Pluto has to do with power and the deep energies of in the human psyche. It's volcanic energies, really, that go deep into the earth itself. The instincts in the human being, and when those two come into play, it's usually a decade or more in which you have a massive impulse. On the one hand, Pluto drives the impulse to be more for change, technological advance, etc., but also an impulse for more political change, often for freedom, rebellion against past structures that might be felt as oppressive. So, of course, in Russia, there's been a lot of activation of the impulse for democracy, for democratic changes, for freedom, etc. But the same two planets can, when those archetypes come together, it also tends to bring an impulse to liberate the will to power, to expand national boundaries, or there can be a kind of imperialist drive. Uranus was conjoining Pluto in the early 1700s when Peter the Great, for example, just totally revolutionized and modernized Russia, but also made it more of an empire. Okay. Well, we've been going through another period like that, the 2007 to 2020 and 2021. We still got it in the background, and I think that impulse to the Russia policies towards Ukraine or towards Crimea, but also towards Western Europe and towards the NATO alliance or towards the United States. There's more of a desire to push back and expand. And of course, that's happening in China too, and it's happening in the United States. Make America great, etc. So that tends to increase. We've all got that background of increased activated energies that can be power struggles. It also gives the possibility, though, psychologically, of activating deep energies that are transformational. And when people use those same energies to, like through holotropic breath work or through different methods of psychological transformation, there is greater potential for deep change, deep psychological change, and bringing things up from the past and releasing them. It's not an accident that Stan Grof, who we know well and studied with, Stanislav Grof, he was born under a Uranus-Pluto period, 1931, under the square, and then the next during the 1960s, when Uranus and Pluto were conjoined, that's when kind of, in a way, many of his deepest insights emerged.
I'm trying to understand this Urano-Pluto archetype better, because on one hand, you're explaining that it could be revolutionary and struggle for freedom. On the other hand, it could be that the opposite a little bit. For me, it feels the opposite, that the strong power becomes stronger and it expands. Correct?
Yes, yeah. Uranus liberates, and because Pluto has to do with the deep primordial energies of power, survival, the Darwinian evolutionary impulse to survive and reproduce, the Freudian id, the deep instincts. Uranus liberates Pluto, which can liberate a shadow kind of energy that is underneath the veneer of civilization.
So like ego energy, yes.
It can overtake the ego and drive it to now, but the especially opposite energy comes in when Saturn comes into the picture, which it has very strongly right now and the last 3 years. So Saturn is the archetype of structure and authority and limits. Also, it can be like oppression, the impulse to contract, to hold down, to keep everything in rigid order. But on the positive side, it's discipline, strong grounded foundations, a sense of appreciation of the positive qualities of the past, of having a good order. But you can see the negative side can be quite oppressive and limiting and suppressing any impulse towards freedom or towards the new, towards change. And Saturn has came into the conjunction with Pluto and squaring Uranus now. First, it conjoined Pluto. All during the period of the pandemic, it was really strong conjunction. And see, then Pluto is empowering Saturn. So everything that Saturn represents, there's separation. We're all constrained, constricted by the pandemic. We have to wear masks. We can't touch each other. We do everything long distance. People feel closed in. They cannot breathe. They also more sense of aloneness, being alone, lonely, loss of income, not being able to support oneself, loss of resources. So the whole world's been going through that, and that's a hard aspect to deal with. 2018 to 2020, very strong Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and we're just starting to come out of it. By the way, that also tends to coincide with periods of conflict, international conflict, where the boundaries or there can be a tendency to project the enemy onto other people and see them as the problem, like scapegoats, or projecting the shadow, or also being genuinely oppressed by a invading power of some kind. So
not easy.
What's that?
Not easy.
No, every time that Saturn and Pluto came into hard aspect, like they were conjoined from 1946 to 48, and that was when the Cold War really began very intensely. Major famine in Russia, but great sense of divided boundaries between the communist world and the so-called free world, the United States, Soviet Union, etc. And then under the next conjunction, 1981 to 84, the Cold War kind of reaches a peak during the Ronald Reagan. This is before Gorbachev came in. Then a whole period of when Gorbachev came in, the Uranian energy conjoining Neptune, very different kind of energy all through the later 80s and the 90s, the glasnost, the perestroika, the dissolving of the Cold War. but now it's again, we've got another conjunction, right? We've had a conjunction these last 3 years, and
Mhm.
that there's that strong tendency to have enmity between the powers, the superpowers. Same thing with China. Okay, and then you have Saturn is now also squaring Uranus right now, quite tight, and this brings in a great challenging conflict between the impulse for change and and freedom versus the impulse for control and resisting change, for keeping control, order, uh, and there's a tendency for there to be a lot of activation of dissident energy and
Mhm.
also crackdowns on dissident.
I was thinking, Rick, maybe may I ask on how do you experience this energy on in Russia on a personal level
At
experience?
first, when protests in winter started, when Navalny was still free, there was a lot of a feeling that change can happen. But after that, the government was very strict, and people are thinking about other alternative ways uh, to change the system. But I also wanted to ask Rick about this interesting configuration of Saturn square Uranus, because in Russian astrologers, they use a lot of they use the idea of rulership. So Saturn is in Aquarius now, and Saturn traditionally used to rule Aquarius. But when Uranus was discovered, everyone said, okay, no, it's Uranus who really rules Aquarius.
Aquarius.
And so now we have this conflict between Saturn, who is also strong in Aquarius, as a system of rules and regulations that uh, try to bring the country forward. And I can see how our president is trying to do it. He is not just interested in oppressing people, but he really does want to make Russia stronger on one hand. And on the other hand, we have Uranus in Taurus that I think represents Navalny and Protasevich very well, their kind of energy, their kind of liberation, and also their economic interest, because both of them talk that the economic system is unfair in our country. So I just I think that this combination, this archetypal dynamic, is represented very well in our countries.
Yeah, I feel that same discouragement about making fundamental political change uh, when I view the Russian situation with even in the last, I think, 24 hours or 48 hours, the 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 Russian court deciding that Navalny's organization is seen as an extremist organization that needs to be suppressed in all sorts of ways, a lot of penalties for being associated with it. It's a pretty Saturnian, iron fist coming down against it. I understand Putin has got a connection to, in a sense, the Russian uh, history and pride and desire to strengthen Russia, make it a, a, affirmed as a world power in a
Mhm.
certain way,
Yes.
worthy of dignity. I think, when I consider Russian history, I am, and I think about your question, Xenia, about what on a psychological level, in a
Mhm.
deep way, what can we say about what our challenges are in Russia and so forth.
Mhm.
My sense is that how just as each of us as an individual, when we do our inner work, we go in and we try to connect with the deep experiences that had an effect on us, that like early childhood trauma, for example, where we might have faced a very frightening situation, or where there were losses. A parent might have died, or someone dear to us, or all sorts of things that affected us. They're in our soul, even though 30 years later or 40 years later we are but we're still influenced by the continuing power of the trauma in our unconscious psyche. And when I look at Russian history, I can't help but see, I mean, the amount of trauma that is in the past, coming from whether it's the enormous losses in World War II, or in the Civil War, after World War I, or the Stalin period, or but even before all that, even 19th, 18th, 17th century, there are many huge, you're very subject to incursions from the Huns, or the other Asian warrior forces that came in, and famines and so forth. And I would assume that what is necessary is we each not only have our individual traumas to work through, we have our collective traumas to work through. And when we do deep inner work, we can contact the part of us that has our family history, and has our ancestral history, and has our national ethnic history. It's all inside our soul, and it's not all negative, but just an inconceivable losses that are lodged in there. But there's also the joy and poetry and depth of the Russian experience, and the Russian soul is there, that you can see expressed and hear, in the music, or in the poetry and literature. My sense is that what's required is each person to be able to have the courage to go deep inside themselves, to be able to access the unconscious traumas and suffering that is in the depths, release it. As Stan Gross said, the full experience of an emotion is the funeral pyre of the emotion. It releases those traumas that are in us. It releases the suffering, but it has to come into consciousness first. And so it's almost like we have to do a deep dive and connect with our great grandparents who suffered through this or that, and pull that up and experience the loss, do the crying, or also the rage. Let the anger be released in a safe setting, and then then there's less likelihood to express the rage inappropriately against people in the present moment, and there's less tendency to see the world in stark terms of black and white, or enemy versus me, where you're feeling more like you're a victim. Because if you are always acting as a victim, then there's a tendency to create situations that keep the same energies alive as were appropriate for the trauma type, for the early trauma, but are no longer appropriate. We might be in a different world. So Anna, whether you were saying when people are feeling that with the clear suppression of Navalny, for example, in the sense that change is not as possible as it seemed a while ago. Did you say that change happened as a result of the pandemic and the power?
I don't think it was connected with the pandemic.
No.
There was a
Okay.
general sense of kind of Saturn waiting
Yeah.
on, but but Navalny's situation was separate from that. But actually, as you were saying, I think that your words right now about healing the collective trauma is very, very important, because I feel that for a lot of Russian people, what is the best way to heal on a collective level? Because at this moment, I feel that celebration and just remembrance of our ancestors doesn't fully heal the wound, as if there is still something left, as if we celebrate the victory while we do not acknowledge
the pain.
okay,
I can imagine that situation of large exaltation of pride, military victory, and in terms of being able to go deep into the into the losses and the sacrifices and the tragedies that have been suffered during World War II, also at other times. That has to be done on so many levels. I don't know the situation in the Russian academic world, for example, the scholarly world, or the world of historians. But one of the things that has been important in Germany, for example, and very important now in the United States, is honest look at our history, and by historians, by scholars, and bringing up the shadows of the past, like how much racism in the United States has been from slavery, and also the treatment of the Native Americans when the Europeans first came to the American continents, to really bring the shadow into consciousness and recognize that, and also to look at the suffering that has not been acknowledged before. It's hard work, and it's not fun for a nation to look in the mirror and see that it's a dark mirror. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to look at shadow and suffering in our past, and it has to be done by historians, because that brings it to consciousness, and it gets out into books, and it's discussed, and it's talked about in newspapers and book reviews, and it's not just a kind of academic thing. It's part of the work of bringing to consciousness. So some of the hard work is done in a therapeutic setting, like a holotropic breath work sessions, even of a large group, or etc. Some of the work is done privately, but it's also some of the work is done through words and through research, and going into yes, we won World War II, and it was a great victory, and etc. But here was the price. Here was the cost that also came with that. We need to be honest about that, and to feel the tears and the suffering as family members starve to death, and things like that, and just so it has to happen. What I'm describing in a way is something that has to happen in a psychological inward turn, psycho-spiritual, moral, but individually, but it also is something that happens collectively through the work of our universities, of our scholars, of our the press, you know, where book reviews and political commentary, political reflection, and that takes courage. It takes hard work. And then I'm also saying that this has to be something that is not carried just by the Russian people. Other nations, and I think the United States has a special relationship to Russia. I mean, our having this conversation is part of that. But so also, have you ever heard of Esalen Institute here in the United States?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so Stan Groff and I lived there for many years in the 1970s and 1980s in Big Sur. And in the early 1980s, when the Soviet-American relationship was at the worst place, you know, Reagan was calling Russia or the Soviet Union the evil empire, and all those nuclear missiles were lined up against each other. But I remember it very well because I was in my 30s at that point. And there were demonstrations all around the world against the nuclear danger of nuclear holocaust that the Soviet Union and the United States were causing the whole world. And right when things were at their worst and no communication between the higher level of the Soviet Union and the United States, Ronald Reagan was president in his first term. Esalen Institute hosted kind of secretly these meetings between members of the Kremlin and members of the US State Department. And they would
Really?
come to, yeah, it's been written about a lot. I could send, you know, titles of books to you. And it was called the Soviet American Exchange Program. And members of the Kremlin and members of the State Department who officially could not talk to each other, they came to Esalen, which is a beautiful place. It's right on the Pacific Ocean, and they would meet and talk, and then there's also hot baths, hot tub, you know, right on the cliffs by the ocean there, and nobody wears clothes there. So if you come to the hot tubs, you take your clothes off. So and you're in the tubs and you're talking, and your armor is gone. You can't. You're just a regular human being. And also, they did breath work together. They did holotropic breath work together in the meeting rooms at Esalen. And at the end of these sessions, there was a real friendship that emerged, you know, and a much deeper sense of mutual understanding. And then what happened is these people from the government who couldn't talk to each other, they go back to their governments, you know, to the Washington, D.C. and to Moscow, and but they're different. They've gone through a change, and they can affect attitudes within their circle in a way that many people think that these meetings played a significant role in making it possible for a more trusting relationship between the Soviet Union during the Gorbachev period and the later Reagan years. So it's interesting how holotropic breathwork and also the recognition that we're all in this together played I think an important role. Anna, go ahead.
If I can add, as
Please.
you were saying, I had this small insight about literature and TV shows as a way of collective healing. Because I remember when I was reading the book, Quiet Flows the Dawn. It's a very famous book in
Yes.
Russian.
Mhm.
You've heard? Okay. For me, it was so beautiful because it showed the situation of civil war from the complexity of it. There were no good guys and no bad guys. And I think the biggest problem for me is when someone is demonized, the other one is evil, the other one is attacking us, and we have to be strong against him. Whereas in real life, it is always complicated and intermixed. And so, literature like that or TV shows, they help to process this, to understand that it's nobody's fault that the history happened that way. And so for me, that book was truly therapeutical for my
Mhm.
Russian soul, maybe.
Yes, that's beautiful. Um, and I think it's Russian literature. I think particularly from the 19th century onwards, helped teach uh, the world this important insight that you brought up, Anna, which is that great literature just doesn't tell a story from the point of view of one person, right, and everybody else is seen as a kind of out there as an object. They're able to, when one reads War and Peace, you experience, okay, here's what it's like to be a young girl falling in love, like Natasha, and here's what it's like to be an old man dying alone, or here's what it's like to be a young soldier on the battlefield. Um, or with Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, each brother uh, and each of the women that are connected to the brothers, Dostoevsky tells the story from inside each one. You get a feeling for what it is like to be these multiple human beings with multiple perspectives, and no one person is right and everybody else is wrong. It's more complex, and so literature and films and television programs, I think, can do a lot towards helping us gain a sympathetic. It helps the sympathetic imagination grow, so that we can enter into the inner lives of other people compassionately. The Russian sensibility is a model in certain ways in literature. It taught us this multiple point of view perspective. Uh, Dostoevsky is often used as an example of the kind of dialogical reality that he's able to articulate, rather than a monological where it's just one person's perspective. Uh, that's a really good point. So I guess what I'm describing is both a something that we individuals, or Russian individuals, each have responsibility for us to do our own inner work. But then there's cultural work that can be done. I mean, what you're doing right now by hosting, you know, podcasts or interviews or presentations, translations between different languages, what people do through their writing of literature and creation of films and television programs, and then also the importance of the whole international community pulling together on this. I think if there could be, I think as we enter into the great crisis more and more of the world climate, the global climate crisis, and also as we continue to try to solve and heal the pandemic, the COVID catastrophe throughout the world, and this is a time to pull together. I mean, no one country is going to solve the problem. no one country is at fault. This would be a great opportunity for a kind of collective effort to heal the world. Sometimes catastrophes and crises bring the possibility of major changes like that, of changes of soul, changes of spiritual attitude, psychological attitude. Anna, can I ask you, do you do teaching or writing yourself there in Russia?
No, not yet. I was thinking about it, but I haven't started it yet.
I hope you do. Don't you think so, Senia? You think?
Yes, I think Anna could be well, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I think Anna could be a really good teacher. I would be a very lucky person to have a person like this in my life. Really.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and but it's not easy step. So I understand that it takes sometimes time and courage and
Yeah, and also paying attention to what is naturally emerging in your own creative energy, like
yes.
where what seems to be calling you, to like when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a musician, and electric guitarist, rock, because I was playing in a rock band, and it turned out I had a different calling. I didn't really find out about that until I was about 29, 30 years old. Then I realized, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. I didn't think I was ever going to write any books, and but it turned out that's what I was supposed to do. I didn't think I'd ever be a professor or teacher like that, and but that's life teaches us what we're supposed to do sometimes, but you have to pay attention to the little promptings inside the psyche that give us, like, where do I feel most alive? Where do I how do I want to what seems to come to me with a kind of ease, that is my gift. So I bet you have a big future.
I agree.
I have another astrological question for you.
Yes.
I was wondering, so you know how the world is, on one hand, governments are all getting separated. They're all, China is here, Russia is here, US is here. But at the same time, the internet community is kind of overlapping. And then there's this Bitcoin currency, which is basically a currency that doesn't need a government anymore. What is your prospect for the future of humanity, considering the technological advance?
What you'd bring up about the dissolving of kind of strict national boundaries because of technological. I mean, we saw that already early in the 1980s, for example, when the fact that people could watch television and see what was happening on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and it kind of changed the self-image of who one is when you could. The technology made possible more awareness of what's happening outside of one's own nation, which then changed what happened inside the nation. And I think now with the internet, that's even more the case. in the 1990s, when the World Wide Web was coming into play, there was a great idealism, a kind of utopian idealism, that this was going to save the world as a kind of democratizing unity, where every individual could be their own, could now had a platform to be able to express themselves, and also you could do it across national boundaries, etc. One of the things that, I think there's basically forces of darkness and forces of light at work all the time. And one of the things that the forces of darkness are very good at doing is taking anything, including a technological advance, and figuring out ways that can be used in order to serve its purposes, so that the very idealistic utopian dream of the early internet creators is now, we now see, well, all sorts of the internet and social media and ways of hacking and so forth can be used to serve oppressive governments. It can be used as a way to steal people's money and identity and so forth. And it's also a way for pornographers and for violent extremists to share their ideology, and also to send out false news, to create totally diluted understanding of what's going on in the world. Obviously, it really happened here in the United States in a big way over the last few years. So that's the thing. The technology is always a two-edged sword. The sword is a technology. Prometheus's fire that liberates humankind, but the fire can also get out of control. It can. You have the Sorcerer's Apprentice. That fable. And so, while I think, on the one hand, the existence of these powerful world-changing technologies can increase the possibility of global understanding, of democratic emancipation, increase mutual understanding, etc., create new communities that weren't possible. But I have to have an eye for shadow and recognize that anything can be appropriated by destructive forces. I think we're part of a larger evolutionary unfolding that I think does have, it's not just random. I don't think it's all up to chance. I think there's larger spiritual forces at work that we don't know about. History is shaped by many things. It's a mystery. And if you look at each of our own individual lives, we can see that I think each of us feels that some deeper kind of spiritual intelligence is at work that shapes our lives, that even the negative things that happen to us as well as the positive ones are playing a role, that there's some purpose that's being played out in our lives, and we meet certain people at certain times that make possible the opening of doors to whole ways of life that wouldn't have happened if we didn't meet that person at that time. And yet, in retrospect, we couldn't even imagine what our lives would be if we hadn't had that gone through that door. We would be a different person. We wouldn't know who we are. It's as if we had to meet that person. It was destined to be. It might be a teacher. It might be a partner, a beloved, a spouse. It might be a friend, or a book that can be just kind of come into our hands, you know, and change our lives. I don't think it's an accident when those things happen. I think there's maybe we can think of them as angels, or we can think of them as providence, or we can think of them as the deeper spirit of history, or God, or there's different ways of imagining what these larger forces are at work. But I truly believe that there's intelligent, purposeful forces at work that are playing a role in what's going to unfold over the next 20 years. And at the same time, I think each of us has a personal responsibility to play our role, and that we have a certain amount of freedom to do that. There's a bit of free agency in each of us that the world is depending on, that we do that act that takes a little courage, or that we find an ability to be compassionate about something or someone that we weren't before. Hard work, you know, you have to open up your heart in a way that you were protecting and holding it tight before. You and I, we don't have our fingers on the levers of power in the Kremlin or in the White House, or in big corporation boardrooms. But what we do in our lives, and what we say to each other, and the little ways in which we act and think, they ripple out into the world in mysterious ways, and they can shape the future in ways that we don't understand. So when I consider the future, I recognize that shadow forces are very strong right now. We're facing tremendous challenges. The extinction of species that's happening right now, and the you know, the political oppression that's taking place, in the polarization within nations, et cetera, and between nations. All those things are huge challenges. But I think there's a role that is played by hope, you know, that if we have hope that there is a larger good at work, there's a larger mystery that's unfolding, and we have a kind of trust in the universe and a trust in our own deep soul that it is moving towards a more joyful, loving, life-enhancing future. The very act of holding that hope is like a seed that goes into the future, that can grow, you know, that can that we water it in the soil, and it can flower in the future. So hope is not just, it's not just a kind of optimistic assessment of the evidence. The evidence can be quite discouraging, but if you have a hope that we don't know how the world's going to unfold, that there's always surprises, and there's deeper forces at work than we can see, just as we can recognize them in our own lives. I feel that gesture of hope, that it's something we cultivate, it's a virtue that we cultivate. It actually can play a transformational role in the shaping of the future. So while I don't know how to answer your question, Anna, in terms of, you know, what Bitcoin or you know, other new technological developments and so forth could play, what kind of a world will we have?
No, but I
I
think
do have hope.
yeah, you're answering Anna's question in the previous question when Anna was speaking about, feeling of hopeless. So you can feel hopeless because of the situation, because you think there is no way out. But now you're speaking about cultivating hope within you. It's work. It's actually also works.
It might come down to acting on the basis of hope in a very private way, in a very individual, just within your own world. Perhaps that then sets a model for how the other people act, and then that can ripple out in a certain way.
Yeah.
I want to say something about the fact that each generation has kind of its own karma, its own, each generation has its own kind of psychological character, and it has its own archetypal background. My generation, I'm 71 years old. Stan Groff, he's 89, just about to turn 90 years old in later this month. We're carrying earlier generations and those possibilities. Just talking to Anna today, we hear the voice of a generation that's just starting to come into its flowering, and you're going to bring special energies and possibilities into the world. I don't know if you were born with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in your natal chart, but there's a kind of awakening energy that carries. And that whole generation that was born in the later 1980s and 1990s is carrying, I have a daughter who's that age, you're carrying that energy in a way that's quite, well, it's the millennial generation, and there's new possibilities there. So I have hope that's also based on youth, on the new young generation coming of age with fresh energies, new horizons to explore, and they also can learn from my generation's mistakes as well as the positive things that my generation did, and then build on that. That's where some of my hope.
Well, I also hear that so many young people, study spirituality and do the inner work, not necessarily religious practice, but
Right.
do inner work. And it wasn't like this when I was growing up in my generation. So I also have hope because I think this generation work on themselves more than we did.
Mm-hmm. And your generation and a bit my generation, we worked on ourselves more than the preceding generation. We're way more psychological. I think everybody from the 1960s on became more psychological. And there wasn't, like, my parents, they would not see a psychologist or do holotropic breath work or anything. That wasn't in their mind at all. They're just focused on raising their children, doing the job, having going to the fight in the war if they need to. The idea of a lot of inward self-reflection or thinking about one's childhood and how did that affect me. That kind of self-reflection and psychological self-exploration was not very widespread in earlier generations. And I think we're moving more and more into a mode of consciousness that many people are more psychological, or more spiritual, not necessarily tied to a particular church, but having a sense that there's a deeper mystery at work in life, and wanting to connect with that, and sensing that there's more to life than just the material world. We modern people tend to think of ourselves as each being kind of individual atoms, individual separate entities, and therefore our sense of strength, or what we are going to nourish ourselves, is kind of it's in a smaller, it's held in a smaller container. It's not open to the deep powers of the universe. All of us really are forms of the cosmos and forms of the earth. I mean, we're born out of the earth. All of animal evolution and human evolution, it's coming out of the earth itself and out of the cosmos, and then it's flowering in the form that takes the form of Xenia or Anna or Eugenia or Rick, and that flowering is very individual, just in the same way that the oak tree or the dolphin or the rose flower each has its own individual character, and the cosmos has flowered in that particular way, and that particular oak tree or dolphin exalts in being a dolphin or an oak tree. Well, each of us as individuals, we get our strength by flowering in our individual way. But ultimately, if we let our armoring go and go through the eye of the needle to get to the deep sources of our strength, psychologically, spiritually, energetically, we can access a sense that something much bigger is living through me than just Rick, in a kind of individual ego way. I'm being held up by and inspired by a larger kind of cosmic spiritual force that is at work in me, which I can't access as long as I'm stuck in my little fortress that I'm protecting it all in all ways. Ultimately, the person who's living in that kind of fortress starts losing sources of nourishment, and they're not open to the love that can be coming in, because they're so armored and so needing to show their strength. It's a matter of connecting to the deeper cosmic ground that gave birth to us, and it's there inside us. We are partially cut off from it because of the traumas and the armoring and the self-protective militancy of our egos or of our national egos or whatever. And I think that individual work that we can do, then that can ripple out into the culture and shape the future in a certain way. I hope that gives a little sense for what I'm talking about.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much.
We're all 14 billion years old, really. We've all got these. This is just our present incarnation, and this moment and our role in our historical moment, has been kind of destined, and the universe is kind of relying on us to carry it forward, but the universe is in us doing that. So it gives more of a sense of strength, that to recognize that we're part of the whole rather than locked up in our own fortress.
Thank you. This is Very nice, inspiring, and I think I personally think that Russian people have natural access to those how to say levels
Mhm.
of psyche somehow. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel that's kind of what I was trying to say at the beginning, about
Yeah.
the special gift of the Russian soul to world culture, which for those of us on the other side of the world, particularly came in through literature
Yeah.
and music, ballet, some films too, as well, that have been very influential. But they give us a sense for the beauty of the Russian soul and its depth. Yeah, there's great treasures that are waiting to be unlocked.
Mm. Thank you so much. Thank you for this evening. I don't know, do you have any questions or comments or?
No, I think I just wanted to say that today there was an eclipse, and Russian astrologers say that whenever the eclipses tend to bring life-changing events, something that changes your destiny. Well, this conversation, I think, will affect my destiny because I had some really deep realizations about collective trauma and how to heal it. And so thank you, Rick, very much.
Oh,
Me and Ksenia will carry your work into Russian-speaking countries and
thank you,
help
thank you.
other people know about it.
Well, thank you. It's been a privilege to speak to you both.
Have a great day in California and have a great evening in Moscow. Well, in Russia, Anna,
Yes.
and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.